And we're live. All right, guys, boom. So this is Mark Joyner, and this is officially now the Mark Joyner Show. Now that I have the logo up, before that, it was not the Mark Joyner Show, but now that I have the logo, it is officially the Mark Joyner Show. Guys, this is a special occasion today. I've been wanting to host a live debate for the longest time, but everybody, there's such pussies in the world today that nobody wants to do it. Paul and Wade are definitely not that, and pardon me to anybody who was offended by my use of that word. Just kidding. I don't really care. Guys, you guys are brave. Not only are you brave, you're subject matter experts, and you're willing to come at this from a position of intelligence and gentleness. I've never seen you guys speak ill to anyone. You guys are gentlemen. This is the way I think discourse needs to go in the world. And right now, everybody's screaming at each other, basically, parroting talking points. And then, you turn on the mainstream news and you've got propaganda. You turn on the alternative press and you've got people who just don't know what the hell they're talking about a lot of the times, which I don't know which is worse. I would like to see more real, intelligent discourse in the world. And we're taking on a very important topic today, and that is the matter of meat. And we have some very starkly different opinions in this particular field. So guys, before I introduce Wade and Paul, I'll tell you, for me, I do have a little bit of a dog in this fight. I was vegan twice for 2 separate years of my life. I thought I was doing very well on it, and then I started to have a decline. Now, personally, that's what I observe in a lot of the vegans that are out there. But if anybody's making veganism work, I'm cool with that, because I also don't believe in diet dogma. I think there are way too many unknown variables out there to really know what the hell is going on with certainty. I have a few opinions that I've formed along the way of what I think is correct, but I'm certainly open to being absolutely wrong about these things. None of us has an omniscient data set, so how the F could we know? Now, Paul, I've been studying for many, many years. I was first introduced to him by Michelle Owen, one of his top instructors out there in New Zealand. And I was just stunned at the depth and breadth of Paul's knowledge. And Paul, I'm going to speak for you on it for a second here. And if I'm wrong, please correct me when we jump in to talk to you. But as I understand it, your dietary philosophy is based on metabolic typing and Weston A. Price, if I could summarize it pretty well, which is based on the notion that if you do metabolic typing, you can form an ideal diet for someone. And this going off of how to eat, move, and be healthy. And then the Weston A. Price overlay on top of that being, and that, would inform how we decide on the choices of our food. Paul, have I done justice?
You're close. I use that metabolic typing Weston A. Price model as a means of identifying a starting point to begin one's relationship with food, so that they can get real-time feedback, meal to meal, moment to moment, to determine whether or not that is actually working for them.
Yes.
So you're right. That's the model I use because it's a good one. But the thing that most commonly is misunderstood is a lot of people think that's what I use like a tool, but that's just a way for me to find a metabolic starting point that's likely to be a good place to start.
Very well said. Okay. And so you're then a fan of bioindividuality and how, hey, none of these models are sufficient to really describe all of the phenomena, but we need to have some kind of a starting point. Okay. Beautiful. Exactly. And a few other things about Paul. I mean, Paul, so guys like Laird Hamilton, the greatest big wave surfer of all time, of recorded history, more or less. When a guy like that has problems with his body, he goes to Paul Chek, right? There are a lot of famous golfers out there, a lot of wonderful people out there who rely on Paul because Paul has sort of like this next level wisdom. Now, the only criticism I've ever heard anyone level on Paul is that sometimes he puts some woo-woo stuff in there. And the first time I came across Paul's stuff, I was like, man, some of this is a little woo-woo. But I tell you what, over time, I was like, damn, everything that I was a little skeptical about that Paul said, later I discovered, holy shit, the dude was right. So anything he says now, I'm like, reserve all judgment, because this guy has studied a lot. And he trained boxers in the Army. He grew up on a farm. He's done all kinds of amazing stuff, man. And great to have you on, Paul.
It's my pleasure, and I'm great to be here with both of you. It's a really important topic, and I think you're doing a great job introducing it already.
Thank you for that. And for Wade, I've been studying Wade for a long time. When I was in my second vegan journey, I remember seeing some videos of Wade, and I was like, damn, that dude is jacked as a vegan. And I remember him, this was kind of a precursor to the company he's running now. I remember him saying, hey, you want to understand the secret to vegan bodybuilding? It's all about sprouts. And he went on to explain how the sprouts were where all the enzymes were and all of that. And I thought, wow, that's pretty amazing. And Wade has been a very well-known figure in the veganism community for a long time, an accomplished bodybuilder, and now is in a different era of his business life where he is selling supplements with his partner, Matt, and they have an absolutely fabulous company. You guys have probably seen Bioptimizers. And by the way, you guys feel free to plug any of your stuff, your websites, whatever, throughout the whole thing.
I'll just jump in and say the nice thing about Wade supplements is they actually work.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, one thing that really got me about Wade and got me to respect him a lot, one thing that he did in the beginning, when he first came out with the Masszymes, he uncapped the Masszymes, poured them in water, and had 2 pieces of beef and 2 glasses, and then stirred them up. And he showed how some of these other enzymes just aren't doing anything. Here are my proteolytic enzymes that are actually, hey, digesting proteins, right? And he was able to demonstrate that. I thought, wow, that is a level of integrity you don't see most people exhibit in the nutritional world. So Wade, great to have you on too, brother. And as I understand it, your dietary philosophy is, and this is, I'm just gleaning this, from what I understand, you have evolved it to be a low protein, a decidedly low protein approach. I don't know if it's purely vegan anymore, but that's the last I heard. Is that correct?
You know, I think that one of the challenges of what I call dietary tribalism is, and the subsequent discussions that ensue from it, is people are trying to take a snapshot where someone is on the continuum of their human experience and then peg a set of principles that are static and not dynamic. And that gets us into dogmatic thinking to begin with. And it's clickbait. You know, we live in a world where our brain centers are hooked by potential threats of conflict. And that's what gets people to pay attention to. And I think where Paul and I would agree is the first step in choosing dietary selection, whatever that might be, is number one, determining where you're at. But number two, being able to figure out the tools to observe what the heck is going on with you and stop paying attention to the noise and start paying attention to the signals that your body have been giving you and you may have been avoiding for an extended period of time. As you get stronger and stronger in that signal recognition, because I think senses of humanity are so perverted that they cannot tell what the real signal is from what the noise is.
That's right.
And so when people come to us, they're looking for the dogmatic one step, here you go, A, B, C, here we go, because that's the world that people want to live in. And that's not the world that we live in. It's a fluctuation, it's a field, it's a dynamic. We're all empty space or atoms or electricity or fields or separate from these other concepts. So I want to couch that. And so what I would say, to be correct in my assumption, to be correct in what I would advocate, is I'm advocating people to select the diet that supports them and to remain flexible enough to integrate whatever steps are necessary without judgment or reservation or limitation. So if it comes to a point where, you know, like I could never imagine 25 years ago that I would ever be able to exist on a plant-based diet. In fact, I would make fun of vegans or vegetarians or things like that. Like that was a source of humor and enjoyment for me, especially coming from where I am in rural Canada, where, you know, I had a gun at 14 and all that stuff. To nowadays, I have a company, which my business partner is a ketogenic guy. We're as about a polar spectrum on the spectrum as possible. But that's where I've learned the most. I've learned the most because I think that all diets have advantages and disadvantages subsequent with it. And sometimes those advantages are something that you need to take action of, or you need to let go of the disadvantages of a current diet, because I think very few diets are all encompassing, that you're able to address every single need at every single point in your life. And the dogmatic following of that is the problem. And I think once you get your diet regulated and you get your health in order and your physique in order and your fitness and your cognitive potential in order, then as you tune more and more into the signals, I think you're able to move into the diet that's right for you with your state of consciousness, your awareness, and what's right for you, and doesn't really require any sort of, hey, it's my way or the highway.
When are you two going to start screaming at each other, man? Come on. We're off on the wrong.
Maybe when we get out in his rock farm and start lifting some heavy rocks and need to encourage ourselves.
Sign me up, man. Sign me up.
I think just in response to that, Wade's a buddy of mine. We spent time together, and we've talked philosophy, religion, life, and we've both been around a while. I'm going to be 60 here 2 weeks from now, and Wade's, a little younger than me, but been around long enough to see all the patterns and the trials and the successes and the failures and the dogmas, and see the people behind the dogmas. Most of them aren't good examples of what they're promoting or selling. And so I think Wade and I both really have reached the wise man stage of our own evolution, where we realize there's a little bit of truth in everything. And it really just comes down to meeting your authentic needs, as opposed to renting your psyche out to somebody else's fantasy,
Yeah. What's really interesting is I've noticed that a lot of the, hardcore monetarians in the diet world even are starting now to evolve to a more epistemologically enlightened state. I mean, when you've got even guys like Sean Baker, who is all about the carnivore diet, right? Even he will say, hey guys, we don't really know what's working. It's working for me. It's working for some people. I'm not advocating this for the whole world, but I'm going to go out and I'm going to state my case for meat. I think, wow, this is very different from the discussion that we used to have, which was like, veganism is the one true faith. No, the Atkins diet is the one true faith. And people are starting to realize how now that, hey, maybe that whole paradigm of the one true anything is not sufficient when we're dealing with humans that have a limited capacity for the amount of data that they can process, swimming in an infinite sea of information. How could we proclaim that we have the dogma when we're simply not equipped intellectually to have the dogma? So I'm very glad that you guys have stated from that perspective in general. I think that's probably the fundamentally most important thing. I
think it's important to remember that if all you've got in your pocket is a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Yeah, that's right.
Are you trying to say that you have a hammer in your pocket?
I have a big ass toolkit, baby.
I knew it was going to go there. There's always the, oh goodness. Okay. So, with all that said, okay. And so you guys do have slightly different opinions in terms of at least what's working for you. Right. Mm-hmm. Now, so wait, you have, so when I say you advocate a low protein diet, now, do you recommend this for others as well? Do you feel strongly enough about it to recommend that as a starting point for a lot of people?
I wouldn't say it's a starting point. What I would suggest that most people that are having problems with their diet need to go on some form of an elimination diet. They need to eliminate what's screwing them up. Now, in some cases, that might be a situation like Tony Robbins. Okay, so let's take Tony Robbins, a famous Tony, as disciplined as they get, as well-versed as they get, as at Advocate, but, was backstage at an event recently getting blood transfusions because he's eaten so much deep sea fish for an extended period of time. His mercury levels were the highest recorded in medical history, and it was causing internal bleeding for him and got him into real trouble. Now, is it because Tony Robbins not disciplined? Is it because Tony Robbins isn't following his program or advocating or have access to the right information? No, he was actually a victim of his own success. He was so good at following what he was. It was the thing that he didn't know was the problem. So he had to make some dietary adjustments. He also was a vegan, I believe, for a period of time, and that did not.
I used to be his therapist, just so you know.
There you go. So Paul would probably have more insight into this. I was an advocate for meat for many years, and I think there's an advantage in meat eating from one standpoint or two standpoints. Satiety is a big factor for calorie limitation. And I think meat eating diets do offer that for people that are having problems with blood sugar dysregulation and things like that. Satiety is a big factor. And the secondary thing is it's easy to access. In other words, in North America, that's an easy diet. If you're in other parts of the world, that's very difficult. So we have to recognize that inside of where we might find ourselves are going to be. Now, if it came right down to it, like, Wade, you want to peg me in a thing, can you make an argument for vegetarianism, veganism, whatever you want to call it? And I think you can under circumstances. And what a lot of people don't know about what I advocate is I believe that the state of the world right now makes it almost impossible to have a diet that will supply you everything without auxiliary augmentation based on your genetics, your epigenetics, and the limitations from which the food supply that you're getting, regardless whether you're vegan or meat eating. And I think right now, in a lot of cases, we feed our animals better than we feed people. And the animals will provide certain elements and nutrients that maybe a vegan diet can't do. But if you do a vegan diet right, it's simple, it's fast, and it's easy. And I think it can be one of the easiest ways to lose weight because of the fiber content that's involved. But that's not eating. You can eat a vegan diet that's from 7-Eleven that will get you into trouble really fast.
Yeah.
You can eat a meat diet from almost anywhere if it's not free range organic. It'll poison you very fast.
Yeah.
That's right.
Whenever you're ready, I just got a couple comments I'd like to
Please
share.
do.
Well, you know, I don't have any disagreements with what Wade is saying. You know, for 37 years, people have come to me from all over the world with serious health and performance challenges, most of them medical failures. Kobe Bryant came to me because nobody could figure out what was wrong with him. And it took me about 6 minutes to figure him out. And he almost started crying. He was so shocked.
Wow.
The first thing he said is, how in the hell did you, a guy without a college education, figure me out so quick when I've been seeing doctors and therapists that are the most elite and most expensive for 2 years, and none of them did a damn thing for me? And I said, because you're seeing people that don't understand how the human body works. That's the problem. So the point I'm making is that my work with diet and all things has come through 37 years of meeting the dragon head on and taking the challenge to figure out, what does this person need physically, emotionally, mentally, or spiritually, and where is the problem actually got its epicenter? Because that's where the most energy is tied up. If I can free that up, then I can help a person heal almost everything because of the domino effect. So the next point is that one of the things I've observed in my clinical practice is that anybody whose parents, one or both parents, comes from a region in the world where the ground freezes in the winter has a genetic requirement for flesh foods. Not everybody can extract enough protein out of the fibrous plant foods to feed the needs of their hormonal system specifically. I have personally been a vegetarian twice in my life. I was a vegetarian when I was a kid because when my mother joined the Self-Realization Fellowship, it was sort of what the yogis did, what was kind of inspired. And within 6 months, I started getting dizzy and losing all my strength. And so my mom took me to a naturopathic physician. He tested me and he said, this kid's anemic. What's he eating? My mom said he's been a vegetarian for 6 months. She said, take him home, feed him a steak, and he'll be fine. Within 2 hours of eating meat, I felt completely normal. And that was the end of that. When I was in my 40s, my soul told me I needed to become a vegetarian, which lasted exactly a year to the day. And in that period of time, I lost 24 pounds of muscle. No matter how hard I worked out, I was hungry as a motherfucker all day long. But my soul kept telling me, you must stay on this diet. At the same time, I was doing a lot of deep training in shamanism and places and practices where I need my clairvoyance and my inner vision at its maximum. And I was astounded how powerful a vegetarian diet was for deepening my spiritual practices. So my body just couldn't take it. But as a tool for spiritual development, I found it profound. And of course, having conducted hundreds of healing ceremonies with plant medicines, often multi-days long, where I fast, I know what it feels like to be off the meat and to be empty. And I can feel the changes at every level of my body. Then if I go do a deadlift workout, I can track down a cow and eat the damn thing for 2 days, right? So what I'm saying is that I found through careful observation that if both parents come from a region of the world where the ground freezes, that person is very unlikely to be able to stay healthy as a vegetarian for very long, because if they can't extract enough protein out of their diet, they will start having hormonal problems. And I've seen it more times than I can count. And I've tried every trick in the book. Some of them would let me give them whey protein. I had a doctor that would make me custom organic whey protein. He would even do a blood analysis and customize it to their blood. I've worked with Swiss pharmaceutical. I've worked with supplement manufacturers. I've tried rice protein, pea protein, egg protein, every damn thing under the sun. And I've thrown the frickin' kitchen sink at people oftentimes over the course of a year and found that none of these approaches would work. I got some of them to start off with fish or bone broth, and within 72 hours, it's like watching the lights turn on. I've also had to take people off of meat because their bodies were so poisoned from eating commercially farmed meat that even though they needed meat, I needed to detox them. So I have had put people on vegetarian diets for as much as 3 months with metal-free and detoxes and parasite cleanses, because I have to clean the system out to reset it. Or like Wade said earlier, they can't feel anything. They're so blocked up, they can't feel what's happening to them when they eat. They're like walking dead people. So another point I want to bring up, Byron Robinson, MD, who was a genius medical doctor, he wrote a book called The Abdominal and Pelvic Brain in 1899, which I have a copy of. Then his second edition in 1907 is freaking mind-blowing. If it was published today, it would rock this world. In fact, I had a Russian-trained medical doctor who was also an MD in the United States and a PhD in physiology. One time visiting me, he used to be the chief education developer for biohealth diagnostics, where I did all my functional medicine training with Dr. Bill Timmons. He came to my office one time and he brought this book, The Abdominal Brain, and it was, published maybe 10 years ago. And it was like the big thing. And they were just celebrating all this stuff about the solar plexus and everything that it controlled. And I said, that's not new at all. He said, oh, yes, it is. And he started spouting off his, I've been researching this for years. I walked him over to my antique books and I handed him 2 editions of The Abdominal Pelvic Brain. I said, have a look at this. And he about shit himself. When he saw what was in those books, he damn near shit himself when he saw the publish dates on it. My point is, Byron Robinson, MD, was a freaking genius. And what he did was a study where he dissected, I can't remember the total number, it was like 650 bodies. And he had a question: do people that live in regions where they don't get a lot of meat, like inland aboriginals, for example, or various places in India, have longer intestinal tracts through the adaptation over time, which allows them to extract more from the foods they're eating and gives them more time? Remember, a cow has 5 stomachs because it has to extract protein out of grass.
That's right. A gorilla has a giant cecum, right?
A gorilla also produces enzymes that break down fibrous foods and release proteins that humans don't produce. And all these damn documentaries talking about gorillas and chimpanzees being vegetarians, and that not only that, that's bullshit too, because they're not vegetarians. But what he showed was quite shocking. He showed the difference. He measured the intron from mouth to anus, so the gut tube from mouth to anus. He found in people like the Eskimos in heavy meat-eating region and some Native American people that their intestinal tracts were as short as 21 feet from mouth to anus. Yet when he analyzed the people that had died that came from regions where they were largely vegetarian, their intestinal tracts from mouth to anus could be 42 feet long. So he showed, particularly in places where people have been in that region for long periods of time and were kind of in their natural culture, that their bodies had adapted to the point they doubled the length of their intestinal tracts, and clearly showed that we adapt to our environment over time to give us a greater chance of survivability. Now, somebody with a 42-foot long intestinal tract would be easy to put on a vegetarian diet, and they could probably put on muscle like Wade does. In fact, Wade, when you die, if I'm around, I'd like you to lend me the rights to see how long your intestinal tract is.
We're going to measure your intron, Wade. That's it. Sorry.
Well, unfortunately, the likelihood that you guys live past me is super unlikely, since I'm going to probably extend beyond all of it. But hey, that's a contest that I do hope I win, not because I want to win it, because that I would not want you have to suffer the loss of our friendship in the physical realm, and I'll take that hit for both of us.
I can dissect you on the other side energetically. But so you see, I'm bringing this up now. There's many studies like this. I have a library full of this shit. Wade's seen my library. He knows that it's not a few.
It's
books,
the best. It's the best library I've come into contact with in regards to all things health and esoteric.
Thank you. And it is about $500,000 of my hard-earned money. And so the point I'm making is that if we get into a vegetarian dogma or any kind of dogma, we are ignoring biochemical individuality. We're ignoring genetic individuality. We're ignoring environmental influences. And we have to remember that stress summates in the human body. Physical stress, stress from the hormonal system, the limbic system, the musculoskeletal system, the hormonal system, every system in the body, and every emotional and mental and spiritual stressor adds up to a total stress picture in the body. So most of these people that are making these decisions about how they eat or how they train are only looking at it from a physical perspective, but they don't realize that their hormonal system is responding to global stress. And in an environment right now that we're dealing with all this pandemic horse shit, people are completely and utterly freaked out. So their dietary needs can change radically. And somebody who's eating a vegetarian diet right now that's producing a lot of stress hormones is likely to have emotional swings of severity, very likely to become heavily anxious and then burn that system out and become depressed because they're not getting the nutrients that their body can absorb, or they don't know how to supplement effectively. Until I analyze a person like that, I don't know how close to a vegetarian diet I can keep them on with supplements that fit their mindset. So I think we have to be aware that diet is a very complex issue that has to be evaluated from a physical, emotional, mental, and a spiritual perspective. For example, someone like Wade and I can go through what we're going through in the world right now because we have an anchor in something beyond our ego. We have a spiritual anchor. So our stress levels in the same environment as someone who has no anchor like that, or who thinks the devil's come to get them, is going to be very different. So our whole needs are going to be different because of our spiritual anchoring. A lot of people don't have that.
Wade, I know you must want to respond to a lot of that, please.
Yes, great. So first off, there's a lot of crossover from how Paul and I address issues. And I think what puts me in a very unique position over and above many people, and that is, so Paul has developed a career as the last stop up the mountain.
Yeah.
When nothing else works.
Rightly so.
They come up to the wise man on the hill, and he says,
That's when they're ready for the woo-woo.
right. They're willing to abandon whatever dogma they had because they just want to be fixed. And what I can say, what happened to me in 2001, I was a competitive bodybuilder. I'd gone through national championships and things like that, and had abandoned the sport because it largely became a drug cult. Now, we have to recognize, though, some of the successes of the bodybuilding industry, which has been able to subvert natural evolutionary selection processes. In other words, you're trying to increase muscle mass disproportionately and lower body fat levels disproportionately relative to what nature gave you. So what that is an interesting application in its first place, because we've got your natural historical aspects, and then we're trying to subvert that. But there's a fine line between tweaking a system and perverting a system. And in the way of what I would say competitive bodybuilding at its highest form in the professional ranks, it's gone to a perversion. It evolved past its health-giving physique cultural components, which both Paul and I are advocates. And I had been meditating for 6 months and came across a book called The Holy Science, which Paul would be familiar with.
Is
it was
that
written by
Yogananda's?
Yogananda's, Swami
Sri
Yukteswar. And inside that book, I actually have a copy right here because I thought it might be valuable for people to see. You have to realize, I'm as dogmatic of a belief person at this point as you could possibly get. Yeah, I need meat with every meal. I need this many grams of protein, this many grams, all that sort of stuff. And I read his book, and he puts together a logical dissertation, if you will, of what is natural living, food, dwelling, company. What is the right food for man? What is the observation of teeth, digestive canal, sensory response mechanisms? In comparison between carnivores, herbivores, and concordant with the organs of senses, and many of the things that Paul just brought up about the length of the digestive tract. And then, of course, there's the incisors. If you run out into a field and try to take a bite of a cow, it's very difficult. If you're around a slaughterhouse and the blood is jetting out, few people want to get a hold of the carotid artery and start licking up that blood. There's a few people in political office that might, but I couldn't resist that one.
They are.
But there's an excitatory response that is activated in predatorial animals, that when an animal starts to bleed or go that sort of, it increases aggressiveness and the desire to kill that animal and rip the flesh out. And usually when the animal's been bled out, the carnivore will go in and eat the entrails first, where all the enzymes and probiotics and all that, and then they'll eat the carcass. This is an interesting process, because I'm gonna come back to that in an extent, because there's something you can learn from there. If you go to a bear, which is an omnivore, it'll grab salmon out of the river. The salmon flying up out of the river, it grabs that, eats the salmon raw, or wanders out into the blueberry patch and starts eating blueberries. Okay, now its teeth are a combination of rippers and grinders. And then if you look at a horse or a cow, which we alluded to earlier, they have multiple stomachs to deal with all the fiber, and but they'll select sproutish kind of foods, very enzymatically probiotic rich things close to the soil that would be naturally occurring. And if we were to walk a human through a kill floor versus an apple orchard, okay, there would be a difference in the salivary response mechanisms, how the eyes looks, the sensory stuff, who wants to be around rotting carcasses, blood, things like that, killing, the squealing of animals as they writhe in pain. Like, it's not that pleasant. But a walk through an apple orchard or through a group of cherries or bananas, whatever, is generally pleasant and inviting. In fact, we manufacture a lot of sensor in it. So most of the food that we eat has been added with dyes and preservatives and chemicals. It's not even meat. And so I think one of the things that Paul does advocate is that, hey, get wild game that's as close to its natural state as possible. And I would say the same thing with his like organic, biodynamic, Ayurvedic style grown foods where the roots are down sufficient depth, not 3 feet, which is in most things, but down below 6 feet, which is the Ayurvedic medical things, where you get the life force energy to fill the food up. That's a completely lost art. That's another topic. And so in the observation of these senses, I said, okay, well, wait a minute. I would have to say that I'm going to run an experiment. And for me, and I'm going to expand on this of why I've come to this diet and an advocate of this diet for me with some key caveats. Okay. I did an experiment for 2 weeks. Felt great. Did an experiment for 2 more weeks. Felt great. I said, well, I'll try this for another month. And at the end of the 2 months, I said, well, I guess I just won't eat meat anymore. And that was it. Now, this was not some kind of embracing of a dietary philosophy, wanting to prove something. In fact, it was counter to my natural state of being at the time. But from this argument, my own spiritual lineage, and whatever the reason was, I came to this philosophy. Now, as I applied that to a performance-based diet, this is when I ran into some problems. As I endeavored to compete as a vegetarian, because I said, okay, well, I can live relatively okay on this diet, but can I support muscle mass, low body fat levels in a performance diet? My first run at it over the course of the next 2 years was an unmitigated disaster, which basically I was borrowing a meat-eating mentality to apply to a high-performance situation. And what it left me, yes, I was able to compete successfully at the Mr. Universe contest, but that set up a dietary disaster where I gained 42 pounds of fat and water in 11 weeks. And not only that, the last 6 months leading up to that contest, I felt terrible, which led me to realize that there was something within my dietary choices that wasn't working. And I was following the tenets. I was following a high performance coaching. I had the discipline. What was wrong with this thing? And that was what you don't know in relative to the application of a dietary philosophy will take you out. And for me, I was fortunate enough to meet Dr. Michael O'Brien and started learning about enzymes and probiotics and the mineralization and cleaning out toxins out of the system. And when I followed that, I was able to recoup my health within 6 months. And it took me 4 years of experimentation with 15,000 athletes around the world to optimize that process for a performance-based environment because nobody had done that. And so over the last 20 years since I've been engaged in that, there are certain earmarks and components. If you are applying a vegetarian or vegan diet in a high-performance parameter, that need to be integrated over and above the diet, because this is where I agree with a lot of the meat eaters. And that is a vegan diet stripped bare bones is going to leave major holes on a performance side that need to be addressed. I was fortunate enough to figure it out. Some of those things apply to a meat eating diet. Some of them do not. And I think one of the things that, people that come to see Paul Chek are high performers with very tight windows, oftentimes, in order to operate in. And he has to work within that sequence that he's dealing with to get the results that he does. And that's why he's well known for it. And so I think that's where the nuances in dietary philosophy, the individual you're dealing with, as well as the outcome that you're looking at that particular time in the time window and the tools you have available. And that's my philosophy in a nutshell.
Paul, before I let you respond to that, Wade, could I just interject and ask you, so in those gaps that you believe are filled with meat for most people who are vegan, do you believe that there are vegan interventions that can also fill those gaps?
Yes, that's specifically what I'm saying. Just like, and I think it flows in both or in all dietary directions, in that only through testing, observation, and experience, a full accountability of your results and being able to take them apart, can you address the deficiencies within the diet, whatever the philosophy is. I just happen to figure them out on a vegetarian side or a vegan side. And that's why I advocate that. And that's why I have a supplement company that augments that. We're not limited to vegetarians. As I said, we do ketogenic, we do all sorts of different things for all sorts.
Company right here, by the way.
Yeah. So that's the specifics and nuances that I think people need to address inside of diets, because anytime you get into a discussion or a book, you're always speaking in generalities. When you're coming into, if I go over to Paul's office, there's one person that Paul's dealing with. That's me, right there, as I am at that moment, and the challenges that I'm going to have, and he's going to figure out what that is and address it in an eloquent manner. And I would say the inverse is the same here.
Wow. Okay.
I got a few things. Now, Wade, I may be wrong, but I know you have quite an arsenal and a lot of experience, and there's not a lot of people in the world that have the depth of knowledge nor the toolkit that you do. Therefore, there are many people trying to do what Wade does, trying to keep vegans vegan and vegetarian, but it often simply doesn't work. I would also propose, Wade, and I could be wrong, would you agree that there are people that even with your toolkit that need to eat meat for some reason or another, that in order for them to achieve optimal health, you can't always go vegetarian or vegan, even if you have enzymes and tools?
It's a great question, and one that I've been trying to answer for the better part of 20 years. I would say in short-term situations, oftentimes selecting animal-based products, whatever they may be the fastest route to get to metabolic stability or metabolic flexibility, whatever you want to call that. So like to basically stop the bleeding. Like if you, let's say you take a bullet, I'll use an example. If I get shot and they wheel me into the hospital at 2 o'clock in the morning, and the surgeon comes in there and says, okay, well, what are we going to do here? Wade has a bullet in his chest, and if we don't get it out, it's going to be a problem. So he performs another surgery on me. He creates an incision to get the more inflammatory component out of the system and sews me up, and hopefully I will heal. If he doesn't do that, I die. I'm using an extreme situation for an illustrative purpose. For the most part, the tools that are available because of the biases within our cultural system leads that selecting an animal-based product at that period of time is probably a faster route. I'm not suggesting that the route I'm going to advocate is easier. And my mission for the last 20 years is, what are the vegan options, the vegetarian options, what are options can I go out, find, discover, optimize, integrate, so that I can provide the same array of choices and performance functions that you could if you're on an animal-based diet.
I got a few things. And Wade, one of the things that I've seen, and it's well supported in the literature as well, is that when people have gone the path that you're describing and have found various experts, because I've worked with plenty that have, but they're seeing me because they still have problems, they almost always come to me and sit here and try to tell me how amazing their vegan or vegetarian diet is and how they don't need any help with that. And I smile at them and say, why are you paying me $750 an hour then? Because if it works as good as you say it does, you wouldn't need my help right now, and you're in tough shape. So the thing that I see is that the people that take that path without your expertise, but often getting the best they can get, some big names out there, end up having to counterbalance with a lot of supplements. I've seen some of these people taking 60 supplements 3 times a day. Now, when you look at the research, the more you take nutrition that has been processed and broken down and isolated, the weaker your digestive mechanism gets, because you do not have to break the food down and extract the nutrition out of it. So what I've seen is that paradoxically, the people that stay on the vegetarian diet past the point that I think is optimal, but are counterbalancing with supplements, end up having more and more problems because their ability to digest the fibrous plant foods that they have been eating for a long time begins to diminish, because the whole system's being fed pre-digested food in the form of supplements. So I see that there's a bit of a catch-22, because if you can't find the herbs or the natural stuff to feed a person to keep the whole body engaged in the process of digestion and extraction, then they actually create a weakness that disables their entire motive in the first place, which is living off of plant-based foods. So there is a sort of a catchy tipping point that I've seen a number of times. The other thing that you reminded me of with the bodybuilding issue, and I've seen this countless times, athletes come to me that look fantastic in the mirror to the untrained eye, but I coined the term about 25 years ago, lecturing all over the world, fit sick people.
Yeah.
And I say, don't trade your liver for your biceps. And if you study Eugene Sandow, in 1928, he wrote a book called Life is Movement that to this day, if it was published, would be beautiful and amazing. And he said, and this is before vitamins, there was no vitamins in 1897 when he wrote that book. There was no protein powders. There was nothing. He did it off sound training principles. But in that book, he says something profound. No man can achieve his optimal athletic potential until all his glands and organs are healthy. And that was from the man that was the strongest man in the world and done strength feats that no one has been able to reproduce to this day, with or without steroids. So what I'm pointing out is that if our approach to diet is not optimizing our visceral health from the inside out, then we become someone that looks good in the mirror or wins a CrossFit competition, but is ready to have a heart attack when they take a shit on Monday morning because they're Humpty Dumpty waiting to fall off the wall. So you end up with a good-looking dead body. And as I watch these people start to struggle, they start leaning on more and more caffeine, more and more magic bullets. And so they start pushing the system into overdrive against the body's needs. And the next thing you know, once you enter phase 3 adrenal exhaustion, your body starts going hypothyroid. And so how they respond to that is they start exercising more and more until they're completely friggin' exhausted and everything hurts and no supplements work. And that's when they're really screwed. But that's also when they start listening. Another point was, you're reading Sri Yukteswar, and I've read many, many of these. And as you know, I was raised in that tradition. I spent a whole summer camp with monks. I've got a very deep insight into that. I've studied Steiner extensively and many others. But one of the factors that is very, very important that most people don't have the bandwidth to realize is that somebody with a committed spiritual practice that's a legitimate spiritual practice, by definition, raises their vibration progressively. And there comes a point, and I'm walking that line every day. Like, for example, I cannot eat any red meat. Immediately makes me feel depressed. It's like someone pulled a blanket over my head and it's dark. But I can feel the emotions of the animal. And I know what it is because I purposely did an LSD journey many years ago, took a good dose of LSD and ate some flesh foods to see what happened. And I relived the dying of that animal, and it was an intense 8-hour experience. And having had that experience now without any medicine in my system, if I eat meat, I'm sensitive enough to actually go through the same kind of reliving of it. Then I got to the point now where I can pretty much only, chicken started to bother me. Turkey started to bother me. Anything that's been fed grains messes my body up. and it comes right through the animal. And a lot of people don't realize, they think the meat's the problem, but it's what they're feeding the animals. The point I'm driving at is that through spiritual practice, and Steiner and Yogananda both said exactly the same thing, and both had camps of followers that are completely and utterly confused and trying to force everyone to be vegetarian. But almost with exactly the same words, I can point right to books in my library, and I was trained by the monks that were trained by Yogananda. Brother Triyananda was 75 years old when he trained with, when he taught me meditation, and he was with Yogananda for probably 25 years as his understudy. So I know right from the horse's mouth what Yogananda said. They both said no man should become a vegetarian until it happens naturally. They did not advocate switching people to a vegetarian diet until it happened naturally. And what is naturally? Through spiritual practice, through anchoring yourself in your heart, through empathy and compassion for the challenges of life and people and the experiences, and reaching deeper into spirit, your vibration changes and you become much more sensitive and much more attuned to what it is doing to you when you eat certain animals. And Steiner did a beautiful job of describing something that most people are very unaware of. He said the more membranes there is in any food you eat, the higher the consciousness you're dealing with, because cosmic energy bounces off membranes and resonates in the body. Like when you strike a drum, the vibration goes back and forth between the skins and it resonates. When you strum a guitar, it resonates. So Steiner showed through his own teachings, if you cut open a piece of beef and try to count the membranes right to the fibril, you'll have 1,000 of them in one bite. But if you cut open a carrot or a piece of celery, you'll have a fraction of the membranes. Why Steiner made this point, he said, when you eat an animal, you have to not only break down all those membranes, but you have to break it down to the point that you eliminate the idea of that animal, or you will not be able to remain human. He said it's only because you can dismantle the genetic, the molecular structure, the structure of the animal's body to the point where it can no longer tune into the frequency of the soul of that animal, that you don't turn into an animal. He said, if you lock somebody in a room and fed them nothing but lamb, the only reason they won't turn into a sheep is because the body breaks that food down to the point that the animal idea of the sheep cannot interface with the flesh. If a person is eating flesh foods and they cannot break the flesh foods down, I have seen thousands of cases of depression, of anxiety, of suicidal thoughts. And once I get their diet clean and get their digestion working right, sometimes again have to take them back to a vegetarian diet while I build them up. They're all that stinking thinking and negative insecurities that was coming right out of the animal because they were still tuning into the frequency. The soul of the animal is alive if there's one fiber of that protein. In other words, if you can't break that food down to proteins, fats, and carbohydrates and dismantle it, think of each living thing like an antenna system. There's only so many pieces of an antenna you can take off before it won't pick up the signal anymore. So once you dismantle the antenna system, and the DNA of the animal is a cosmic antenna system that taps into the group soul or the intelligence of that creature, our digestive system is designed to dismantle the antenna, or we cannot reproduce a human out of ourselves because we have another level of consciousness merging with our own. And I see that leading to a lot of inner crisis for people because, like Wade said, you eat a lot of blood and flesh and you get very aggressive and you start behaving that way. So there's a Steiner concept there. So I think the point I'm trying to drive at with a little bit of technical background is that spiritual evolution changes the vibration of your body and makes you much more sensitive. And as you evolve spiritually, your needs metabolically change, because one of the things you do is learn how to handle stress. And if you look at the research on DA and stress, I've seen very good videos and documentaries where when people go into meditation, their DNA literally unwinds and lengthens. It's literally changing the frequency range that it's tuning into. And the more stressed a person is, the tighter the wind in the DNA. And the narrowing of that DNA has the effect of narrowing a person's conscious frequency to only see the enemy. So people that have a committed spiritual practice actually see a lot more options in the world. They don't see things as near as much of a threat because they have inner tools and inner resources. So the needs of their body and the needs to feed the defense mechanism become diminished because they don't have a constant fight going on inside of them. So those are just a few comments that I thought were important to share because most people don't really think about these things.
Wade, you must have some things to say in response to that before we go on to other topics.
Well, yeah. First off, I'm in complete agreement with that observation that no one should decide to become a vegan out of a dogmatic ideal. It is a natural and progressive thing. In my case, it was relatively sudden, but took me many decades to optimize. And it wasn't easy. So I was willing to suspend some of the advantages of a diet that had meat involved, because the collective research and culture developed a lot of tools in conjunction with that. And I said, and many times I would go into the spiritual well, if you will, and I would dive into it and say, God, you know, be sure it would be easy if I could eat some meat here. And I would talk with my spiritual lineage and they'd say, no, son, you are going to stay on this path. And it's something I actually check in with every year with what I call my Jedi Council. And I get the same result every year back. And I always suggest to people, it's like, if it came to the point that I thought that I needed meat to continue on, I would go for it. It just doesn't seem to happen. And I keep being brought tools and resources that support this path for myself and then advocate for people who want to go that. But the biggest thing is spiritualization of one's mission in life quickly dispenses the apparent divisions that are relative to this domain of perception. If you are locked into the 5 sensory experiences, then what you will get is division. If you are able to inwardly reverse those benches, which is into the spine and into the direct perception of the truth, you'll start to realize that there is no Paul and Wade and Mark. This is a relative division. And what I eat feeds Paul, and what Paul eats feeds me. And there is no separation behind that. And that's, now, for some people, that's a really woo-woo idea. And one of the things of true spiritual progression is not to be bought into in a religious dogma. You follow a set of tenets and a practice that's suitable to your place in the world, which may be dietary, it may be practices, might be meditation, might be contemplation. There's a variety of different methods to get up the mountain. But if you put Buddha and Jesus and Krishna and Zoroaster and all the great saints in the world, some of them eat meat, some of them don't. Some of them, meditate. Some of them contemplate. Some of them do good works. Some of them say, "Oh, that's a waste of time."
Sit in caves.
Yeah, but if you sat them on the mountaintop together, they'd have a great time, and there would be no division within it. And what I would say is, I believe that there is a universal set of principles that is accessible and will come forth in the coming ages of humanity out of necessity, where we will move beyond this biochemical limitation of perception and move into a more vibrational perception. And at that point, these arguments will be irrelevant.
I also want to say, Wade, from a spiritual perspective, from a soul perspective, I think it's safe for me to say that if you had not stuck to your path for the spiritual reasons that you mentioned, we would not have
perception.
We would not have bioptimizers here.
That's correct.
Say that if you had not stuck to your path, we got a loop. You guys hearing that loop back?
Yeah, that's fixed. That's fixed, guys. Apologies for that.
I was like, how freaking me out. I'm hearing two Wades at once. I'm like, okay, he's shape-shifting on me now.
I wanted to put that in there right when you started talking about LSD, just to mess with everybody a little bit.
Yeah, well, that's what it's like sometimes. But anyhow, I'm just saying, Wade, there's an example of how your commitment to really working through the challenges to solve this out, where most people would have just given up and taken the easy path, ultimately was the gift to all of us, because without it, bioptimizers wouldn't be here. Just like if I hadn't have stuck to my path, I had to deal with thousands and thousands of nasty grams and people telling me, when I introduced the Swiss ball to the exercise industry, people told me I was a fucking idiot. They called me a fag. They told me to get the ball out of the gym. I mean, I got treated like shit. I could go through a long list of these things. And really, I think it takes a spiritual center, a compass, to know what you're here to do. And when you have that sense of inner assurance, it guides you through the choppy waters. And there's something bigger than your ego involved. And it gives you the strength to put up with all the small minds that you meet along the way. Right on my wall, right here. I've had this my whole career. This poster is as old as I am practically. It's a picture of Einstein. It says, "Great spirits always encountered violent opposition from mediocre minds." And that's just the reality of it. I'm just proud of you for sticking to it, is what I'm saying. I don't really have anything else to add except whatever you'd like to go into, Mark.
I'd love to get to a few questions here from the folks watching. Before we do that, I want to make a couple of comments that I think we could probably all agree with, just listening to everybody's discussion about this. And I'm so glad that we did this, because this went about as well as I could have expected. You guys are exemplifying. Well, I mean, really, like, compared to what most of us see, what passes for discourse these days, which is, two monologues pretending to be a dialogue, and most of them coming armed with an agenda. You guys are here saying, hey, I don't know, here are the things that are working for me, and I'm completely open to learning from you what's going on. And I think that if we all come from that stance, we can, do a lot of what my old late friend Win Wenger used to call drawing out. He would create this interesting distinction between the Latin etymology for the word education. There's educare and educare, and educare is this cramming in of information, which is what most of the school system is these days, which is just it's a tragedy, really. But he's a fan of what, the opposite, educare, drawing out. And he said, look, we need to draw each other out, rather than come and yell at each other about what's, what we believe is right. Like, okay, hey, maybe I heard this person say this, maybe I've got a little bit of issue with that. Let me ask them some questions rather than come in and, come out with all of your virtue blazing and say you're wrong, And so this manifests in a couple of really interesting ways. So one is, people don't realize how dangerous dogma is. And so in the 90s and the noughties, if you will, I saw the dogma sort of reach a fever pitch in the diet world, and things were coming out like, hey, if you just switch to a vegan diet, you're going to be fine. And they would even say, it doesn't even matter if it's a junk food vegan diet, just whatever, as long as it's vegan, it's good for you. And I saw that advice destroy a lot of lives. In the flip side of it was, you had the same guys saying, hey, if you just stop eating carbs, everything's going to be fine. And they wouldn't tell you, hey, be careful about where you're selecting the food. Go read Weston A. Price to find out, what, he discovered from a rather robust body of evidence, how you need to be selecting your foods. They didn't talk about Steiner or any of the other models like that. They were just giving dogmatic advice. And when people get that, a lot of really dangerous stuff happens, right? So one is they start making nuanceless bad decisions. And I want to say a little bit more about that here before we go to some of the questions. And then the other thing that they do is they start throwing out all of the other healthy stuff that they do. This is, the marketers of the world. And I hate to be somebody who writes books about marketing and partly responsible for this, but I try to teach business owners not to do this. It's a quixotic task. But, when we want to tell people that our solution is the only solution, and if you do just this, everything's going to be fine. Well, what people do is they throw away all of the other good stuff that they were doing that was working. Oh, I found out now the whole secret to everything is alkalinity. Well, fuck it. I'm going to smoke because I noticed that my alkalinity pee stick doesn't change when I smoke cigarettes. Right. And I mean, and I'm not even exaggerating. That is the kind of thinking that kind of communication stimulates in people. And the other point about nuance, so back around to that, when people talk about the dangers of meat in a lot of the vegan literature out there, that's one thing I always see missing. It's like, well, have you isolated for the variable of where the fuck are they getting this meat? Because I mean, there's a stark difference between, some beef that was raised in New Zealand, raised on proper grass as it should be, treated humanely, in some animal that's been fed grains, injected with hormones, and subjected to a life of torture. And that's not even a remote exaggeration, to a life of torture in a CAFO. Do you think that the biological effect of those two different things is going to be slightly different? Can we say such things as, well, meat is meat is meat?
No.
I mean, we cannot. Please, Paul.
I just have a couple of comments on some of these issues because I think they're important. One, what we're talking about is.
Oh, sorry to interrupt. Your mic's. Do you hear that buzzing on Paul's mic, Wade?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
Let's see I don't hear anything.
It's a little bit of a buzz. Yeah, it's still there, but it's not too bad.
Okay. I know, I think all three of us share this. We have become the men that we are because we have really been interested in the great thinkers of the world and the great producers, right? I made myself successful by studying the best people at centralizing discs, or the best people at neck injuries, or the best people at digestion issues, or the best people in spiritual development. And in fact, on my birthday, August the 24th, I'm releasing a solo podcast called The People That Changed My Life. And it's almost 4 hours long, and I had to cut the list very short. But I basically wanted to share who the top probably 80 people that changed my life, because their ideas and their concepts were so profound and had such tangible application in my personal life and in my professional life that I can't say who Paul Chek is, because he's nobody without a Wade Lightheart, a Mark Joyner. Even though I have stark disagreements with Tony Robbins' diet philosophy, I did learn some cool shit. I was his therapist. Him and I are the same age. We're 2 weeks apart. For about 2 or 3 years, he used to come to me to work on his body, and his voice would get tired. So I taught him how to exercise. I turned him on to I think it was Stu Middleman. That's what kicked off his heart rate. I started all that for him. I couldn't get him to listen to me on diet, and none of my practitioners that he hired he would listen to either. In fact, that got to be so bad. Tony Robbins has study groups all over the world. One of his biggest ones is in London, which has about 1,000 people, and they meet in an auditorium. And one of my students came to me personally and said, Paul, would you be willing to come give a lecture to the Tony Robbins study group I'm a part of? Because, Tony wants us all to be vegetarians. And a lot of people are really sick since they've been on that diet, especially after about a year. And the lady that runs it is a brain surgeon. She's read your book, How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy, and she would love it if you would come give a presentation and help us figure out what's going on. So I went and gave a presentation on my basic philosophy as presented, How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy. And the brain surgeon came to me and said that was the most rational, well put together, sound approach to diet I've ever seen. And now I am no longer going to be a vegetarian. I'm going to listen to my body exactly as you taught. I'm going to study your book even more. And it cleared up a lot of the fog. The fact that you mentioned Tony was eating seafood about knocked me out of my chair, because that shows that even Tony's evolving. Now we just got to, get him healthy. So I really was just trying to say that we become great by studying greatness. We become great by practicing greatness. We become love by loving. And when I see people with a dogma, we have to remember belief systems by definition are closed. If you're a Christian and you're caught reading Buddhist literature, you're going to get a very unwelcome thing. If you study consciousness, you can look at the research of Dustin DePerna, for example, in the book Streams of Wisdom, where he shows you, looking at models of consciousness from all over the world, from different religions, different researchers. He makes a very important point. No Christian having an enlightenment experience ever sees Buddha. What is he saying? He's saying you always have an enlightenment experience within the context of your own belief system, which shows how deep belief system goes. In other words, if I give you a hit of DMT, you're going to see Jesus if you're a Christian. You're not going to see Buddha, even though you got the most powerful drug in the world, just disabled your ego, because we are imprinted by belief systems. And it takes a lot of bravery, because the instant you go out of a belief system where you've built your friendships and you've got nurtured, you actually go through a crisis of self, because you don't really know who you are without those people. And that's Joseph Campbell's hero's journey right there. So to really grow, you got to be brave enough to listen to people that are wiser than you, test it and apply it, and be ready to be criticized no matter how good you are for doing it, because you are departing from a closed belief system. And that is where you go on the hero's journey. And that's how you find the pioneers. They've always got arrows in their backs.
Indeed. Wade, would you like to add to that before we go to some audience questions?
I don't think there's really much to add. I think I'm in concurrence with everything that Paul suggested inside of that, in that when one defines themselves not as a physical being, but as a non-physical being, having a physical experience, then and studying excellence, you'll find excellence as its own words and has earmarks of commonalities. And the variance that starts to happen when you embrace a life of excellence is actually not, it's not divisive. It's excitatory in the standpoint that one starts to experience, instead of a threat to one's ideology, as an opportunity to expand one's understanding. And that is really what discourse between people in this realm is supposed to be about. Is I can go down to Paul's place, and Paul's going to share with me decades of wisdom that he's been able to cultivate. And inside of that, there are going to be some things that he's going to suggest to me that's going to go, I'm going to go, wow, I've been thinking about that for a long time. I haven't figured out how to resolve that. And that's where the beauty,
I get the same with you.
And it's not so what I would encourage to the listeners that are watching this podcast, because some people are looking for, a no holds barred fist fight or something, because that's exciting and stuff like that. And I love a good fist fight. I love
that's not what this show is about, by the way.
Yeah, no, but I love those things. It's a violence is a communication that is universally understood.
No question.
I like my fighting to be in the ring and not at night.
But that's why is MMA so popular, because the violence between that is a communication format that virtually everybody understands. As you move up the level of awareness to self-realization, the realization of self, not as a small self as Wade Lightheart, Paul Chek, Mark Joyner. Self is at the big S, which is the universality of all things. Then what seems to be opposing ideas sets off a cascade of wonder and excitement and discovery and integrations and expressions where you go, oh, yeah, I want to, and then you go, can I take this and apply it within my own philosophy? And one of the things that Matt, my business partner, and I, and keep in mind that we started out, and we are both, I always say, Bioptimizers succeeded because we were too stubborn or too stupid to quit. And the battles that he and I have had, him as a ketogenic guy, me as a and spiritual battles. He started out as an atheist, and I'm a devout spiritual guy, and he was into data, and I was into intuition, and we had epic battles, but we kept coming back because we knew that we sharpened each other's arguments and we exposed each other's weaknesses. Awesome. And we've got to this place and expression where we just launched a book, Sick to Superhuman, recently, How to Become Biologically Optimized, and which is in prep to our big Magnus Opus, which is coming out next year. It's going to be the biggest game changer ever in this exact issue. How do I select the right diet for me? Where am I on that continuum? And what's the next move? And and it's literally our whole lives have been poured into the discussions like this to get this. And it's much more complimentary than it was in the early days.
Well, congratulations to you guys on coming out with that book. And so the one that's out now is Sick to Superhuman. Is that correct?
Yeah. That's okay. Available on the site. And again, we're not into dietary dogmatic beliefs. We're into get what's best, the next best step, and keep moving up the ladder.
Yeah. So we got so many interesting questions, and I'm gonna skip some of the ones asking about opinions on COVID vaccines and all that stuff. I don't know what's gonna get us nuked this day and age.
Right.
I'm gonna stick to some of the ones a little bit more on topic. Here's one that I think is a really good entry point here, and we got about 12 minutes left on the time we have allotted. And I know both Paul and Wade have got very tight schedules here, and I appreciate both of you guys so much for showing up for this.
I'm good as long as you're good. You're my last gig today, so I'm good. Whatever. I'm flexible.
Awesome.
This is a very important topic.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Yeah. So the pressure's on Wade. So I'm good for about another.
I'm good to go. I mean,
awesome.
I think we're in a good space. So if we can address as many questions as possible, let's do it.
I'm grateful just to hang out with you guys. I feel
at home. Me too.
I know, right? Yeah, same. This is awesome. Yeah, I wish I could get back to the state. You guys, because you guys are in the same location. I'm in Phuket, Thailand, so a little more of a due to come out to Casa Chek from over here these days. All right, so here's one I think is a really interesting comment. So Scott Cusland here, and buddy, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Cusland. Well, I got it wrong one way or another at this point for sure. So I said it twice. There is no doubt what the healthiest diet is for the planet. Now, before I kick this over to Wade and Paul, I just want to say this kind of goes along with a lot of the dogmatic stuff I was talking about before. How could we possibly know what the healthiest diet for the planet is? I don't know.
Bill Gates thinks that way too.
Say again now?
Bill Gates thinks that way too.
Oh, right. Yeah, that's the scary thing. I mean, speaking of Bill Gates, if you want to talk about how really frightening and terrifying dogma can be, look at Bill Gates saying stuff like, well, we just need to black out the sun a little bit. We just need to take these untested compounds and inject them into everyone.
He's trying to pass laws to stop all animal farming. He's actually got a bill going through the U.S. government in the state of Oregon is where he's doing it first, to make it illegal to farm animals. And he's trying to set it up so nobody can buy anything that's not made by his companies.
Yeah.
Which is all genetically modified, fake animal foods, toxic, poisonous shit.
Yeah.
But my only point is that comment, there is no doubt what the healthiest diet is a statement that puts you in the same camp as Bill Gates. And anybody that thinks that does not understand anything we have talked about in this podcast. And most of the people that have those ideas have zero experience dealing with legitimate health problems, nor the knowledge to discern what is an effective diet, what is an effective supplementation program, and what are the factors involved in finding the right diet for any human being. That is the classic comment from somebody who is cut and pasting a social idea that's part of an ism, not somebody that has the depth of knowledge to realize that we are as different on the inside as we are on the outside, and that is scientific fact.
And I wanted to add on to that for our brother Scott here. Scott, Paul said something that's really, I think, quite important here, and that's that I'm guessing, and correct me if I'm wrong, please feel free to post a follow-up comment, but I'm guessing that you have not come to this conclusion from your own scientific study. I'm guessing, right? I'm guessing that you have probably come to this conclusion by hearing some authority figures out there telling us matter-of-factly, nope, we referred to you all as the amorphous they. We have studied all of these things and we have come to conclusions. And the conclusions, little people, shut up and obey because we're smarter than you. The conclusion is that the vegan diet is the healthiest diet for the planet. And if you don't agree, you are an enemy of the people. And I'm not even it's not even exaggerating.
Yes, you're not being facetious at all. That's the sad part.
That's the reality of how it's communicated. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but the point is Scott, is I would ask you to just be a little bit introspective about it. And if I'm wrong, please correct me, right?
And study farming, study nature. That concept is locked right to the idea we got to get rid of the animals that are causing the greenhouse effect. That is absolute horseshit. That's simply saying that Mother Nature's evolution for billions of years is wrong. Well, it made you, and we with all these experts have fucked it up. And if that concept is true, then I have to ask one very simple question. Why do we have so many sick people that think they're eating the right diet?
Wade, anything you'd like to add to that? I don't know what your opinion is on the healthiest diet for the planet, if you have one.
Well, there's an interesting limitation that comes with the association of physical existence. And that is the limited time continuum from which our perceptions are put forth and the illogical, or I would say, the sanitation of one's own death. And what I can say is, we know historically that, at one time, this earth was bathed in rivers and waves of lava. And there's this process of evolution that continues on. And Homo sapien will go extinct. And I think right now we are in an evolutionary division point. There's Homo sapien, there's Homo digitalis, with the inversion and fusion between cybernetic organisms, which we are participating right now. Yeah. There is
some of us, not
Homo
all of us.
geneticus, the genetic alteration of that. There's Homo mutatus through chemicalization, distortion of perceptive realities. There's a combination of those, so Homo, all of that in a bag of chips. And what is going to emerge of it? What we are in the process is humans have now which is interesting, has put its own evolutionary pressure on itself. So what looks like, in the short-term perspective, things that are damaging or deleterious or death-dealing on the surface may actually be the seeds for the evolution into what I believe is Homo unitus or Homo spiritualis. So I believe that ultimately our goal is to ascend into the realization of the unification of all things in all places at all times, for everything else is merely an excuse. So divisionary statements don't really serve that much of a purpose, because the earmark of wisdom is humility. Mm-hmm. And so doubt is your best friend.
Well, I'll say
that I might be wrong. Maybe I'm wrong. Let's entertain that idea and continually re-examine it.
I've got two comments I want to make to address this issue, if I could.
Please.
One, the right diet for the planet is what feeds the planet. People keep thinking the right diet for the planet is what feeds us. Well, so far we've destroyed the planet trying to find the right diet for human beings with all the so-called science behind all this shit, when all we got to do is observe nature. If you want to know what the right diet for the planet is, then you need to do a soil assessment and find out what's missing and put it back and pay attention to the science of farming. For example, a simple thing I can tell you, I was raised on a farm and I've studied farming extensively. I've studied soil analysis. I've taken comprehensive courses from the best soil scientists in the world so I can understand this. The reality is that weeds are the farmer's report card, but we have a massive chemical industry that's oriented itself since the Second World War on destroying weeds chemically, which has poisoned the entire planet. I could go long into that because we have problems so big, most people haven't got a clue what's sitting right under the surface of this planet. And I'll touch on it briefly. Research shows that NPK fertilizers, which were said to break down, do not break down. And there are billions and billions of tons that have soaked down into the rocks below the topsoil. And researchers now say if we got enough heavy torrential rains, it would poison the planet. And when that water went into the rivers and the oceans, it will kill the rivers and the oceans. It's just a matter of time before it happens. The other thing is that the right diet for the planet is to get back to natural principles. And when we learn how to feed the planet, we will learn how to feed ourselves because we are the planet. The next thing is the vegans and vegetarians go hog wild over all this vegan and vegetarianism, but you don't have to study soil science very far to find out something quite miraculous. 85% of the plants on this planet are mycorrhizoformers, which means they share a relationship with the fungi in the soil. And the fungi excrete powerful acids that dissolve the minerals in stone, liquefy them, and make them bioavailable to plants. And in trade, they get to drink the plant sap because their favorite food is sugar. And they literally grow rhizofilaments right up the tips of the plant roots, just like putting a catheter in a man's penis. And they feed the minerals to the plants, but they also kill any parasite in the soil that will kill that plant to protect its host plant and get in its sugar supply, and they feed those animals to the plant. I have got many pictures in my library of mycorrhiza systems in the root space, the rhizosphere of plants, capturing worms, eating them from the inside out and feeding them to plants. And insects are animals. So wake up, boys and girls, because here's a surprise for you. You can be the hardest core vegetarian you want, but you're eating 85% of the plants on this planet that eat meat to survive. And that's soil science, and it's fact.
Wait,
you're just eating little animals. So what I say to people is, how small do I have to shrink your dog before you're willing to kill it? Well, people say, you couldn't shrink it small enough. And I say, good. Well, just remember, you're eating little doggies because they were fed to the plants, but you think you're a vegetarian. You're actually eating something that gets fed animal food.
Wade, would you like to say anything in response to that before we go on to another question from the audience?
Yeah, I think it's, I think when you go back to one of the limitations is biochemistry and looking at things from a biochemical perceptive component and within the limitations of the confine of the information that I've investigated, all of which are limited and do not component. And so what Paul is sharing, for example, is a very nuanced component of the interrelation between all species, both animal kingdom, plant kingdom, fungal kingdom, mineral kingdom. You can go on to all the different differentiations possible. And so when you get to a certain place, you start to see they're all blended together, and you have to make relative choices based within the domain you find yourself.
Yes.
Yet one should not limit oneself to that, because that's when you start to freeze in your growth and understanding as an individual, and you lose the connectivity with us, the universal.
People keep quoting science, and I say, listen, science is the pursuit of truth. And since plants grow in the soil, if you want to know the truth, then you better know the truth of soil science, or you're living a dogma and you're going to end up infecting others with it, and ultimately not creating health nor growing wisdom. And your body is a living mirror of your choices.
Yeah.
And a lot of the vegan doctors, a lot of the vegan promoter doctors are sick people. All you got to do is look around and you'll see a lot of them are not healthy people. So I always tell my clients and my students, don't go to sick doctors for health advice. That's not smart. I tell my students, if you can't teach in your underwear, you don't belong in the business. You're still a student.
Let's go, boys. Come on.
I've done it many times.
I
had a chiropractor.
I don't think any of us would be afraid to do it here in this context. So.
I was at a debate in a chiropractic conference, and Charles Poliquin was actually on the panel with me. And this doctor was going off on all this hormonal shit and silly crap. And this guy was obese. His eyes looked like they were going to pop out of his head. He looked like his blood pressure was 220 over something. And I said to him, you realize that what you're saying totally negates the principles of natural eating and paying attention to your body. You're talking about hormone supplementations and pill supplementations. So I got up on the table and took my clothes off to my underwear. I said, this is the results of what I teach. Now let me see you show us the results of yours. And the whole audience went into a huge clapping uproar for about 5 fucking minutes, because they too could see that this man was not an example to demonstrate that his own teachings work, but he had thousands of $10 words and sounded like a scientist, which for the immature sounds really cool, but you wear the results of your lifestyle. And when I first met Wade, I was damn impressed. I said, this guy is a bodybuilder, an athlete, and he's close to my age. Wade, you're what, 52?
No, just I'll be turning 50 in next year. So you got a little bit on me.
Sorry, but yeah, so I'm 10 years older than you, but I saw a almost 50-year-old man who still looks fit, strong, healthy, and beautiful. And my first thought was, however the fuck he's doing that on a vegetarian diet, I got to pick his brain, because he's got magic that I need to absorb. That's how I handle that, because I saw a vegetarian that walks the talk and wears the evidence. And I said, there's a teacher for me. But when I see most of these people promoting all this stuff, they don't walk the talk. They're just cut and paste. And David Bohm and Carl Jung both said something almost to the word that was the same. They said, real thinking is hard work. That's why most people just rearrange their prejudices and call it thinking. And I think that is a real problem in our world.
Yeah, and I think that was the emergence, if you look at Nietzsche and what he suggested, and what was interesting about his thinking, he said that the pursuit of truth through the Christian doctrine was the precursor to the scientific method, because when the Christian doctrine became dysfunctional in its dogmatic and falling away from its pursuit of the truth, that gave a platform for the scientific method to continue to experiment and look for the truth. However, he's often quoted as the death of God, as something, God is dead, and it's kind of a celebratory world in an atheist kind of thinking. But he wasn't celebratory of it all, because he says if you don't have this super ideal to hold oneself to, then you quickly go into nihilistic thinking and attitudes. And he predicted that tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions, people would lose their life because of the movement away from that. And that's why he created the Übermensch, the Superman. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, the Superman was also then distorted through the Nazi philosophy. So you cannot discount the ability for humans to distort a noble attempt at the truth and distort it into something to be tyrannical or aggressive or divisive in its nature. And so history has suggested, as free-thinking humans, that a little bit of humility and a willingness to actually listen for people and say, well, what part of this could I integrate with my overall philosophy? And what points am I having challenges with? And how can I dissect them and have these discourses so that we can arrive at a higher truth from all of us? And I think that's where I think humanity needs to go in this digital age, because we're basically monkeys with phones, and there's an amygdala response to anything it's like a tribal threat. And we have to override that response mechanism and get into a place where we can look at and have these kind of discussions.
Can
Before
I make
we go on to the next? Oh, please do, Paul.
Yeah. Two things. Rumi. Do you guys all know? Wade will know Rumi, but Rumi is probably the most celebrated poet that ever lived. He was a Sufi. He started his own Sufi order, which is the mystical branch of Islam. In one of his books, I believe it's the Forbidden Rumi, which the Persian government would not release for a very long time because they didn't want people to know some of Rumi's concepts and ideas that he shared. Rumi said no man can get to God until he becomes a heretic. Why? Because you can't get to God reading shit out of books. That's somebody else's experience. It's not your own. Jung said religion is designed to protect you from a religious experience. I'll leave you to meditate on that one. Now,
wow.
When it comes to Nietzsche, and he said God is dead, the reason he said that, amongst the things that Wade said, is something else. God is a symbol. A symbol is that which transcends itself. If you pray to Jesus on the cross, you're not praying to the cross. You're using the cross as a doorway to the consciousness that is represented by Christ, which most people don't even know what the word means. It means one with all. It doesn't mean a man. Christ is a title. It's not a name. If they pulled him over, the cops would not see a license that says Jesus Christ on it. It's a title. It means someone who realizes that they are the all. So when a symbol becomes converted into a sign, it means that we have objectified it. So what Nietzsche was saying is that people actually think through Christianity that they know what God is and what God wants. Therefore, nobody uses the concept of God to connect to that which is beyond themselves or their own minds or their own beliefs to get guidance beyond themselves. And therefore, the scientific application to the concept of religion has resulted in the objectification of symbols, turning them into signs. When you pull up to a stop sign, even if you're drunk, you know it means step on the brake pedal, not the gas. So nobody has a mystical experience at a stop sign. But when it comes to issues like God, if you are not in a mystical relationship, then you are in an objective relationship, and God is dead then.
Wow.
And science has turned a lot of what we are talking about into signs, which stops people from transcending the carrot or transcending the sheep. We need to say, this sheep is giving something of its life to me. What can I give back to the world? And how can I give this sheep life and make its death meaningful in the world? And then the sheep doesn't die. The sheep lives in us as the choices we make in the life that we live. But if you think it's just a piece of meat, then the sheep is dead, and it is nothing but meat. And that's the scientific approach to all of this. And that's why we're in deep trouble today, because science has not maintained contact with morality. And a moral is a code of conduct that is life affirmative. An ethic is a code of conduct that is often not life affirmative. When I was a soldier in the 82nd Airborne Division, I had a soldier's manual, which is the ethics on how you kill people and how you handle prisoners of war. But it wasn't a moral manual.
You know, it's interesting. You know, a lot of people, when they talk about science, they misunderstand what they're talking about. You know, we confuse some of the reductionist fruits of science for science itself. We confuse the dogmatic views that individual scientists may have and thrust upon everybody else to believe oppressively. We confuse that for science. None of those things are science. You want to understand real science, what you need to do is you need to read somebody like, Richard A. Feynman, right? You know,
yes,
read
or David Bohm.
Yeah, right.
Great scientist.
Or Carl Jung, who was a scientist but a mystic. And look at this. Look at the research in consciousness right now. Yeah. John A. Wheeler said, because this kept happening to him so often, he said, any day now I expect to find a rishi sitting at the end of one of my mathematical equations. Bohm, Heisenberg, all the Wolfgang Pauli, all the founders of quantum physics were deep students of mysticism, of the Tao Te Ching, of all these things. And they found that the wise men and the mystics had already identified and described what they were just finding through science.
Yeah.
So real science always ends up finding out that there's something that transcends it. And ultimately, the scientist realizes that science is open-ended. It never ends.
Absolutely true. And that is the essence of it. I mean, it's a process of inquiry. And unless we were to somehow come across an entity that had omniscience, there is no way that we could know all of it. It's always going to be an unfolding process. And if you believe that the universe is infinite, it will always be an unfolding process, because that's the actual implication of infinity, isn't it? I want to loop back around to a question here from my good buddy, Chris Kelly. He and his wife, Juliet, are just really exemplary people in a lot of ways. They're very advanced. They've sort of switched off their mind from, the mainstream of the world and think for themselves. Chris had a question about something you mentioned early on in the very beginning, Paul, and that was, Paul, can you explain what you mean by freeing energy? What energy and where does it get trapped? It's a great question.
Can you remind me in the context I was speaking about that? Because that can be taken from several angles.
I think you were talking about Kobe, and how when Kobe came to you, that there was you discovered that there was some energy trapped in his body, and that's
no. I said once I figured out what was wrong and corrected it and took him out to test him, he had so much energy of joy coming out because he could jump without pain and play basketball again, that the energy was just bursting out of his body with joy, like a little kid just, jumping around the living room happy.
Yeah.
But I can address that question. Whenever we have anything that we cannot deal with at a conscious level, such as anger over a divorce or getting fired, we hold that energy within our field. And because all human tissue in our body is water, which is diamagnetic, and oxygen is paramagnetic, so our whole body is a dialectic. It's a field of tensions. It's a literal field of tensions, which thoughts, feelings, emotions, biophotons, photons, X-rays, gamma rays, cosmic rays, all are moving through and affecting it constantly. So when someone has pain in their heart, or, for example, people that are sensitive to criticism often hold their insecurity in the small intestine. Each organ tunes into different frequencies, and that's why Chinese medicine assigns positive and negative emotions to key organs, because the organ is an antenna that handles those frequency ranges. All of this has been demonstrated by science, by the way. This is not woo-woo. It's only woo-woo for people that aren't very well schooled. So when we have, let's say, a broken heart, that negative emotional energy organizes the tissues around it, and the tissues mirror the type of energy, the frequency of the energy, and they begin to create changes in the structure that reflects the blocked emotional energy. Once that person heals, you see spontaneous remission of cancer. You see posture change. You see blood pressure change. You see blood levels change. You see DNA changes. So energy in the universe, the entire universe can be boiled down, and quantum physics proves this, that the entire universe is made of energy and information. So emotions are energy and information. Thoughts are energy and information. Your whole body's energy and information. So when we're wounded and we're holding on to energy and information that is oriented towards pain, victimhood, negative orientations, then the body has to deal with that, because as far as the cells of the body is concerned, our mind is God. If you smile, your body believes that you're happy. If you frown, your cells produce the chemicals and the reactions that match your physical expression of your mind.
100.
So, yeah. So the point to really answer his question, whenever we heal something, whatever the charge is, whatever the energy and information is transformed, and healing by definition means movement towards homeostasis. And in shamanism, they say, and it's well documented, that most shamans begin with very tough lives, and they have things like snake bites and lightning strikes. But most of them come through very tough experiences. But the good shaman that I've studied say, before you can become a shaman, you have to heal all your wounds, because all the energy that's trapped in the wounds has to be liberated, or you won't have any healing power. You have to clean your vessel up so you can become a vessel of higher consciousness and let Great Spirit channel through you. But if you're clogged up with all these judgments and all these fears, you cannot move that energy into freedom to create healing. So healing is releasing the energy and information that is incongruent with freedom and love. And that changes the energy state and the physiology.
Okay, I'll tell you what, we're getting a lot more than we bargained for in this today. I want to end on one question, guys, and this is one that is going to be interesting. It has to do with what we were talking about before. It's bringing it back a little bit more to diet. But you guys didn't expect us to go all over the place with this, but all related and important.
This is how it is.
It's the whole on that we're talking about, right? And this is, so speaking earlier about some of the perils of reductionism, the reductionist lens allows us to see certain things in isolation, which is from time to time extremely useful. But if we look only at, or only through the reductionist lens, we're forgetting something very important. So one of my, what I call Joynerism, is a very egoic way of talking about things, to quote myself. But one of the things I like to say over and over again is that causality is never binary. It's always multivariate and conditionally dependent, right? And I haven't found anybody who can break that model. And I don't like to speak in absolutes, but I've never seen an example of how causality could even be binary, and not multivariate and not conditionally dependent. And when we're looking at the world through the reductionist lens, we're stripping away all of that. We're not talking about the conditions that make that observation, relevant in that one particular thing. We're not talking about the other confounding variables that we could not possibly control for in the way we look at things. With that said, I want to bring out this one question from Neil Howe, a very practical one. He says, does an animal-based diet cause more inflammation in the body?
Only if you eat too much or you eat poison food, poisoned animals.
What do you think, Wade?
Anything causes inflammation if you overdo it.
Yeah. So inflammation is the silent killer. And it comes part and parcel with every function that really we will perform in the body. The fact of breathing, the fact of drinking a liquid, the fact of eating dietary components. And so the question is too broad to answer accurately, because, well, if you're going to say, does meat or plants cause inflammation in the diet? Well, what plants, what meat?
What's a reductionist question, right?
Yeah. What was that seared on a barbecue? Was it infused with chemical agents? Is it been highly processed? All of these things are going to impact that statement. And I think what a better question to ask is how may I reduce the amount of negative inflammation that is going on from my current lifestyle as it is?
Hey, maho.
So rather than try to answer questions of absolutes, instead invite yourself to consider what might be the next best thing that I can do on my progression in my own dietary advocacy, and my intention or my goal to be the best physical version I can of myself, and to reduce the sufferings, physical, mental, and spiritual, within myself in my present version. And what is it that I need to let go of in order to open the vessel of my consciousness that I may express a better version of those things? And I think if there's one universal component that I would say we all share, and that is a common element between all of us, and how I've known both of you, and how I see us carrying our information into the world to the people who are drawn to us. Because the people who are drawn to us because there's a concordant component. The teacher and the student have an exchange. The teacher learns from the student, and the student learns from the teacher. They must both coexist.
Should do, yeah.
And this is the dance that we find ourselves in here, as limited as we are in this certain, meat suit that we find ourselves, whether that's made from plants or meat, doesn't matter. What I can say is just take the next best step, and the next best step, and the next best step, and the next best step that you can in that moment. And you'll be surprised of where it will lead you. And it just might lead you to sitting on a mountain with the three of us discoursing about what that next step might be. And I look forward to the opportunity when we get that chance very, very soon.
I would like to add a couple of quick comments if I can, Mark.
Please, please, please.
I would say that the first thing we all need to be very aware of is that all dogmas are pro-inflammatory. People's minds put more stress on their bodies and create more inflammation than their diets do. I can pretty much tell you that from a whole career of evaluating people's belief patterns and how they're living them out. The other thing is you can boil down human physiology to two words, anabolic and catabolic. And there's no such thing as a catabolic process without an inflammatory response. That's the fire that runs the engine, so to speak. And, your body's, you're turning over 2 million red blood cells a second. You turn over your bones every 3 weeks. You turn over your epidermis every 3 days. You turn over your intestinal lining about every 3 weeks. Research now shows that within 365 days, every single cell in your body is replaced, and none of that could happen without the inflammatory process. Something's got to get rid of the dead stuff, and the anabolic grows the new stuff. So the point that I'm driving at is it's not a question of how do you get the inflammation out of your body. It's how do you get to your body so that the anabolic and catabolic forces balance out so that you have enough anabolic reserve to heal, or you can't recover from exercise or stress or study. Real thinking is hard work. I'm writing a new book right now, and my brain gets fried trying to figure out how do I tell these very complicated things about life to people at a level they can understand. I can leave here feeling like I've worked out really hard. And many great scientists and explorers thought themselves right into death. They burnt themselves out, mathematicians especially. So I think what I'm really trying to say is that a healthy body has a healthy color, a healthy vibration, a healthy complexion, healthy energy. And when your diet's moving in a pro-inflammatory direction, it shows up. One of the most common things you see is accumulation of fluid around the belly button, because that happens when cortisol levels rise up. And if your cortisol is rising up, it means you got a lot of inflammation, or there wouldn't be the cortisol there to control it. So you can see inflammation starting right quickly around the belly button in most people. You can see swelling under the eyes because the kidneys are overloaded. You can see discoloration of the eyes because the liver's overloaded. I mean, that's what holistic lifestyle coach training is through my institute, is learning how to read the body and know which glands and organ systems reflex to which part of the body. So just like we know if someone has pain in their left chest and down their arm, we don't think, oh, they've got a chest problem. We want to make sure they don't have a heart problem, because that's a characteristic pattern of the heart itself. So there's signs of inflammation in the heart. There's signs of inflammation in the small intestine, the large intestine. But in general, if your body's getting overheated and you're swelling in any way, shape, or form, that's a great indicator that you probably are too catabolic, and that you need to look carefully for what are the first place to start is what you eat the most. I say that if the fastest way to figure it out is just cut out what you eat the most of, and usually that's the culprit.
Awesome. Gentlemen, I could go on for hours and hours and hours with you guys, and I hope to get the opportunity to do that one of these days, IRL. Maybe you guys can come out to Phuket, or I can go back to the States. If the world stops being insane, maybe we can all travel and see each other. Topic for another day. But guys, I want to close out by just reminding everybody how to get in touch with both of you. So if you guys want to see what Wade is doing, go to buyoptimizers.com, guys. Buyoptimizers.com is a company he's running with his partner, Matt. And they really, really make fabulous, fabulous supplement. I mean, so they sent out me a giant box of all of their stuff, and I experimented with all of their stuff. And I reproduced some of the experiments that Wade shows by taking, different enzymes and then, pouring them out, uncapping them, putting them in water, and then seeing what the actual digestive power is of those in the real context of digesting actual food. And the stuff that Wade has is just, it's superior. They put more attention to detail. They packed more nutrition into a smaller vessel. And I just don't see a lot of companies being run with that level of integrity these days. So, and by the way, you guys have probably seen their stuff. If you've seen a lot of the ads that people are making for Magnesium Breakthrough, used to be Magnesium Miracle, I think, before, but now Magnesium Breakthrough. That's Buyoptimizers. That's the company that does that. And they've got a number of other really, really great things as well. And I know that Paul endorses their supplements too. So
I am one of Wade's experiments.
Yeah, that's right. Outstanding. We can all be each other's lab rats for these things, which is awesome. All right. And guys, if you want to follow any of Paul's stuff, go to chekinstitute.com. Paul's world is so big. I'll tell you a quick story about Paul. When I first interviewed Paul, I guess this is probably like 15 years ago now. I had known about Paul for many years before that through Michelle Owen. And I finally got this opportunity to have this interview with Paul. And before that, Paul had heard about me through Troy Casey. Paul is the only guy who ever offered me a job. He was like, what would it take to get you out here to run our marketing? And I said, you know what, dude, you're like the only guy on the planet who could offer me that and have me go, should I just shut down everything and go work with Paul? Because I was literally thinking about it, because I thought I can't, and I almost regret now, like, man, maybe I should have gone out and worked with Paul, because he's just such an amazing, well-rounded dude. He's like the most balanced guy out there, so
thank you.
Yeah,
I have my moments.
Yeah, don't we all, brother? Don't we all? Guys, go to Chek.
Start talking about COVID, and you'll see some of my moments.
I know, right? That sounds like, man, I want to avoid that topic today, because I know it's going to alienate like half the audience. But guys, chekinstitute.com. If you're serious about getting a certification in any kind of a health field, I would recommend the Chek level certification, probably about above and beyond just about any out there. I don't know of any that are as broad in their view of things as what Paul has put together with his different levels of certification. And when you train with any of the guys that are certified by Paul, you just know right away you're dealing with somebody who's like, they're on a higher level, because they have broader knowledge. They've gone to find deeper causes of the problems, and they don't just treat the surface stuff. So really profound contribution that both of you gentlemen have made to the world. And we need more of this in this period of time. For everybody watching, I hope you've enjoyed this. If you want to see more of this on whatever platform you're on, click like, subscribe, whatever you need to do. Doesn't matter what platform. I'd just love to have you guys show up. I want to do more like this. If you guys like this kind of debate format, which wasn't really intense debate, we had some disagreements, but notice how we were able to disagree and still be respectful of each other and still allow each other to expand our views in the process. And that is something I think that we're missing. I think we need to be able to disagree. It needs to be okay to disagree.
Yeah, I don't think I don't think we had disagreements. I think we're offering each other different vantage points. There's an old saying, if you put 12 enlightened people at a round table with a multicolored bouquet of flowers in the middle, and you ask them all what they see, they'll give you 12 different answers, but they're all enlightened. Why? Because they each have a different perspective, and one guy can see the black flower that the other guy can't see, and he can't see the white flower that the other guy can see. You know, life is very, very complex. The field of diet is the field of life. You cannot be an expert at diet without being knowledgeable about life. So I think disagreements are where people have dogmas that clash. But what I feel that we are doing is sharing perspectives. And when I sit around the table with wise people, I'm very interested in their perspective. And if it clashes with mine, that's where I have an opportunity to say, well, how would you explain this then? And inevitably, even if they don't agree with me, somehow I can take something away, even if it's the awareness that I need to be more conscious about the limitations of my own ideas, right? And that's what I think the world is lacking. Our education system is about programming people to believe, not about learning to think constructively so you can solve problems intelligently and use. All Chek professionals are trained in a multidisciplinary approach. I teach them how to refer out to other people because none of us knows enough to deal with most of the problems that humans have as an individual. And I sure as hell don't, even with all my study, you know.
And I'm certainly, I got to tell you, I'm very grateful and blessed to have both of you guys to engage in that process with. Not just in this context, but in any time. And by the way, open invitation to both of you to appear back on the show. You just call back and ask. I would absolutely love to have both of you guys, either of you, in any permutation whatsoever. Thank you guys so much. It is time to end, sadly. But that's, as Hemingway said, when he was writing, he would always leave a little bit left. He wouldn't finish his last thought. He would hold on to that last thought so that when he went back into it, he would be able to get back into the groove very easily. And I think that's a great way to end the show. There's a lot of things that we would love to say, but maybe on the next time we can continue.
Oh, can't wait. Let's do it.
Let's do it. All right. Take care, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Bye, guys. Lots of love to all of you listening too. And thank you for your flexibility and the opportunity for us to share our insights with you, because what good would we be without you?
Absolutely. Good night, everybody.